On the 28th of June, 1914, a 19-year-old named Gavrilo Princip stopped to buy a sandwich. He had already failed that morning. He was part of a group of assassins who had planned to kill Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, as his motorcade drove through Sarajevo. One of his fellow conspirators had thrown a bomb at the Archduke's car. The bomb bounced off the car, exploded under the vehicle behind it, and injured several people. Franz Ferdinand was fine. The motorcade sped away. The assassination had failed. The conspirators scattered. Gavrilo Princip, dejected, went to buy a sandwich at Schiller's Delicatessen. And then, through a combination of bad traffic management, a wrong turn by the Archduke's driver, and a universe that apparently had strong opinions about how that day was going to go, Franz Ferdinand's car took an unplanned route directly past the delicatessen where Princip was standing with his sandwich. Princip stepped forward. 2 shots. Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie were dead within the hour, and somewhere between that sandwich and those 2 bullets, the 20th century was born. Here is the thing people always get wrong about World War I. They assume it was inevitable, that Europe was so tense, so armed, so ready to explode that some kind of massive conflict was going to happen regardless. And maybe that's true. But the specific war that actually happened, the one that killed 20 million people, destroyed 4 empires, redrew the entire map of the world, and traumatized a generation so thoroughly that they literally called it the war to end all wars, that specific war almost didn't happen at all. It required an almost comedic sequence of miscalculations, misunderstandings, and men who kept assuming someone else would back down first. Nobody did. To understand how we got there, you need to understand what Europe looked like in the summer of 1914. And the honest answer is, it looked fine to most people living in it. The previous 100 years had been, relatively speaking, peaceful. Trade was booming. Technology was advancing. The major European powers were all tangled up in each other's economies in ways that made war seem commercially suicidal. There was a genuine school of thought, written about in best-selling books, that a major European war was now economically impossible, too interconnected, too expensive, too irrational. Those books did not age well. What the optimists missed was the infrastructure of catastrophe quietly being built underneath the surface. Every major power had been expanding their military for decades. Germany had built a navy specifically designed to challenge British naval supremacy, which the British found deeply upsetting, as the British had strong feelings about their navy. Everyone had drafted elaborate war plans. Germany had the Schlieffen Plan, a 2-front war strategy that required invading France through Belgium immediately, like within days of war being declared, because the timing had to be precise. Russia had its own mobilization timetable. Austria-Hungary had theirs. All these plans were like dominoes standing up, intricate, interconnected, and very much requiring that once you pushed the first one, the rest would fall automatically. And then, someone pushed the first one. Austria-Hungary, furious about Franz Ferdinand's assassination and looking for an excuse to deal with Serbia once and for all, issued Serbia an ultimatum so deliberately humiliating that it was basically designed to be rejected. Serbia actually agreed to almost all of it. Almost. Austria-Hungary declared war anyway. Russia, which considered itself the protector of Slavic peoples, began mobilizing in support of Serbia. Germany, allied with Austria-Hungary, told Russia to stop mobilizing or face war. Russia didn't stop. Germany declared war on Russia. France was allied with Russia, So, Germany declared war on France too, and immediately began executing the Schlieffen Plan, invading Belgium to get to France. Britain was guarantor of Belgian neutrality under a treaty from 1839. Britain declared war on Germany. In approximately 6 weeks, a regional dispute in the Balkans had become a continent wide catastrophe involving every major European power. And here's what makes it truly staggering. When the war began in August 1914, most people thought it would be over by Christmas. Soldiers pinned flowers to their uniforms. Crowds cheered in the streets of Berlin, Paris, London, Vienna. Young men rushed to enlist before it was over. There was a genuine fear among the young men lining up to fight that they would miss it. They did not miss it. What nobody had accounted for was the machine gun. The modern industrial machine gun could fire hundreds of rounds per minute. The tactics they were all planning to use, massed infantry charges, cavalry sweeps, the glorious advances of Napoleonic warfare, were completely obsolete. When you charge across open ground toward a machine gun, the machine gun wins. Every time, without exception, with extreme efficiency. Both sides figured this out very quickly. The solution they arrived at was dig a hole. By the end of 1914, a line of trenches stretched approximately 700 kilometers from the English Channel to the Swiss border. Two vast networks of ditches facing each other across a strip of blasted no man's land anywhere from a few dozen meters to a few kilometers wide. And there they sat for 4 years. Life in the trenches was exactly as bad as you've heard, and then considerably worse. Mud that was less like mud and more like a force of nature. In some areas of Flanders, the water table was so high that the trenches would simply fill with water, and soldiers would stand in it for days. Rats the size of cats, fed well on things we won't describe. Shell shock, what we now call PTSD, was so widespread and so poorly understood that many soldiers suffering from it were court-martialed for cowardice. Some were executed for it. The British Army executed 306 of its own soldiers for desertion or cowardice during the war. Most of them were almost certainly suffering from what any modern doctor would immediately recognize as severe psychological trauma. And then there was the actual fighting. Every few months, someone would decide that this time, with more artillery, more men, better planning, they would break through the enemy line and end the stalemate. The Battle of the Somme began on July 1st, 1916. On the first day alone, the British Army suffered 57,470 casualties. In 1 day. The battle lasted 141 days. By the end, the Allied forces had advanced approximately 10 kilometers, at a cost of over 1 million casualties on both sides. 10 kilometers. The generals were not stupid men. They were men applying the military logic of the previous century to a technology they didn't fully understand yet, which is, historically speaking, one of the most dangerous combinations possible. Meanwhile, the war was getting creative in ways that nobody asked for. Poison gas, first used by Germany at Ypres in 1915, introduced a new category of horrible to a conflict that was already setting records in that department. Early gas masks were, generously, imperfect. Soldiers were advised to urinate on a cloth and hold it over their face. Military ingenuity at its finest. Zeppelins, enormous hydrogen-filled airships, began bombing civilian areas. The airplane went from novelty to weapon in approximately 18 months. Tanks appeared on the battlefield for the first time, terrifying soldiers on both sides and occasionally their own crews. War had industrialized completely. Death had been mechanized. By 1917, the strain was showing everywhere. The French army mutinied. Not all of it, but significant portions of it, simply refused to attack anymore. They would hold the line. They would not walk into machine guns again. The Russian Revolution removed Russia from the war entirely. The Ottoman Empire was collapsing. The Austro-Hungarian Empire was held together increasingly by habit rather than any actual coherence. And then, America arrived. The United States had spent the first 3 years of the war insisting it was a European problem. Then, a German submarine sank the Lusitania, killing 1,198 people, including 128 Americans. Then, Germany's foreign secretary sent a telegram to Mexico, intercepted by British intelligence, suggesting that Mexico should attack the United States in exchange for help reclaiming Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. The Zimmerman telegram, as it became known, was the diplomatic equivalent of poking a bear with a stick while standing next to the bear. America declared war on Germany in April 1917. Fresh American troops, arriving at a rate of 10,000 per day by 1918, tipped the balance. Germany's allies were collapsing. The German army was exhausted. On November 11th, 1918, at 11 a.m., the guns stopped. It had lasted 4 years, 3 months, and 2 weeks. Approximately 20 million people were dead. Another 21 million were wounded. The 4 great empires, German, Austro-Hungarian, Russian, Ottoman, had all ceased to exist. The map of Europe, the Middle East, and significant portions of the rest of the world had been redrawn entirely by men sitting in rooms who had mostly never visited the places they were drawing lines through. The peace treaty, the Treaty of Versailles, blamed Germany entirely for the war, stripped it of territory, and imposed war reparations so punishing that the German economy was devastated. The German people were humiliated, desperate, looking for someone to blame and someone to follow. A teenager bought a sandwich. An archduke took a wrong turn. And the world that existed on June 27th, 1914, confident, interconnected, naively optimistic, never came back. What came back instead was something harder, something that had seen what industrialized warfare looked like, something that built the League of Nations and then watched it fail, that drew lines on maps that are still causing problems today, that left a generation of young men in the mud of Flanders fields, and came home asking a question nobody could answer. Was it worth it? They never got a good answer. Neither have we. But here's the thing, and this is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. World War I didn't end anything. It didn't even pause anything. The Treaty of Versailles, the document that was supposed to close the book on the deadliest conflict humanity had ever seen, didn't create peace. It created a waiting room. It took a broken, humiliated Germany and handed it a bill it couldn't pay, a shame it couldn't swallow, and a rage it couldn't contain. The men who signed that treaty in 1919 thought they were ending a war. They were setting a timer. 20 years. That's all it took. 1 generation. Not even enough time for the children born during World War I to fully grow up before the world decided to do it again. Bigger. Worse. With everything they'd learned about industrial killing applied at a scale that makes the Western Front look like a warm-up act. And that story, the one that starts exactly where this one ends, is what we're covering next. Because if World War I was the spark that burned the old world down, World War II was what happened when someone decided to build something monstrous in the ashes. If this video showed you something you didn't know, a detail, a connection, a fact that made you stop and think, that's exactly what this channel is for. Every week, another piece of history, science, or human behavior that most people walked right past without noticing. Hit like if you actually learned something. Subscribe if you want part 2. Because trust me, you want part 2. The timer runs out in the next video.